Looks like the recording is starting up right now. All right, cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is going to be the second day of review. Yesterday, we just kind of did early Jamestown, early New England, what the European powers are doing in the New World. And today, I just want to continue that discussion. Remember, folks, they do ask you about conflict between Native Americans and settlers. And you have two real examples. The examples that they are most commonly asking you about are going to be the Pueblo Revolt in New Mexico against the Spanish, where several different Pueblo tribes will be successful at driving the Spanish out of New Mexico for a couple of decades. I wish I could lecture more in depth on the Pueblo Revolt. They have a couple paragraphs in the textbook on it. I'm not an expert on that. I barely even know what it is, guys, but you have to know an example of native resistance to colonial development in the New World. The Pueblo Revolt is one example against the Spanish. The other one that I know a lot more about is going to be Metacom's War. So I'll talk about Metacom's War for about 2 minutes now, and that's the easiest example, I think. Remember, folks, Metacom's War, 1670s. The British have been in New England now for going on 50 years, and the tribes, specifically the Wampanoag, but there's 4 or 5 other tribes in New England, they understand that if they don't collectively align themselves and push the English out of New England, push the British out of New England, that their Indian way of life is done. The competition for land and resources in New England is already intense by the 1670s. So again, understand that the root cause of the conflict is going to be competition for resources. New England settlers, guys, they don't come into an empty landscape, as you know. Many of these coastal New England towns were previously inhabited Indian villages. So again, Metacom's War causes competition for land and resources. We know the British aren't really trying to convert natives to Christianity or anything like that. So there's not like an attempt to create mission systems or anything like that in New England. It's land and resource competition. We know that the conflict itself, guys, is incredibly violent. The textbook tells us that something like 5% of New England dies. Now, I don't know what the population of New England is, but anytime 5% of a population is dying, that's a pretty huge number. Even if it only ends up being a few thousand casualties, I mean, if that's 5% of the total, that's significant. A whole bunch of New England towns are razed, and it's really just full of tit-for-tat reprisals. Scalping is really common. They've got, the stockade at the Plymouth Fort, mounted with a warrior named Massasoit at its head. It's just a really violent, brutal time. And again, being an expert in the conflict itself is not what they're looking for on the AP test. They are looking for you to understand that the migration of the British to the New World is going to have consequences. Some of those consequences are going to be felt by Native Americans who have traditionally been inhabiting the area and are now facing stiff competition for land and resources. Understanding the scale of violence can certainly give you a little more credit. I think it shows a higher depth of understanding. But again, it's about how migration changes places. It's about how competition for land and resources changes places. Are there more details for Metacom's War? Of course there are. But it's really hard to be an expert on this topic and still having our brain as the sponge remember all the other content, folks. So again, I'm going to keep it simple. Understand that there's a couple conflicts between natives and colonists. If you want to go back and review Pueblo Revolt, you can. Metacom's War is my favorite example. Competition for land and resources. I've repeated it like 5 times now. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Any questions on Metacom's War? It's obviously not successful. Another way you could get an analysis point, guys, if you bring up the phrase kind of pan-Indian identity. This is really a good starting point. And it's not ever going to fully be realized, guys. Indians are going to constantly be fighting with each other. They're constantly stealing from each other on the Great Plains. There's just constant tit-for-tat reprisals amongst these tribes. But again, when the resources are becoming more pressures put on the resource use, when essentially American or Europeans start to put more pressure on them, Indians oftentimes put aside their traditional tribal differences, which all of them have tribal differences, but they oftentimes put aside those tribal differences in an attempt to beat back European or American influence. That's not like a profound statement, folks, but it will make you sound a lot smarter on the AP test if you can articulate that American migration or European migration in the New World is additionally going to create early forms of pan-Indian, cohesion in an attempt to fight this off. I worded that really awkwardly, but I think you get what I'm trying to say on that. So that was Metacom's War. I'm going to do screen share real quick and pull up vocabulary and see what else I've missed. You're going to see someone's face really big in a moment here. All right, give me a thumbs up if it's if you can see my screen. Sweet. So just looking up the vocabulary, guys. I do want to talk about Anne Hutchinson real quick in Puritan New England before we move on. We talked about Bacon. We've talked about, and the Puritan Pequot War, guys, that's actually totally separate than Metacom's War. I really don't even know much about that conflict. It's an earlier conflict that you could use as an example, but you don't have to remember all these examples. You just need to have the one. And so that's why I spent a little bit more time talking about Metacom's War. The Puritan Pequot War would work. So would the Pueblo Revolt. We know about the encomienda system. We talked about that. We've talked enough about indentured servitude in Jamestown. I really think the only thing I want to talk about again, guys, is real quick Anne Hutchinson. And remember, it's part of the goals of Puritan New England. It's a society that demands conformity. If you are a Catholic, if you are a member of a dissenting faith, you can find a home in some other settlement. And that's why you have this other vocabulary term here, Roger Williams in Rhode Island. Remember, New England, guys, is not a bastion of tolerance. They're very, very intolerant of dissenting faiths. And that's why Anne Hutchinson was the prominent example. She is a female who is not only interpreting the word of God for herself, which is bringing up all sorts of gender issues in itself, but she is essentially questioning the authority of her Puritan local leaders. And we know what happened. She's excommunicated from the Puritan church. That's just one example, folks, of what Puritan society might be like in the 1600s. You can go back in and read the essay if you want to, This Great and Sore Affliction. I think a lot of you will like it. There's so many cool details on there about her boat ride over, bickering with the Puritan pastors on the boat ride over. But again, it's not all the details that they're going to ask you about. It's about understanding what Puritan society is all about. And Anne Hutchinson and her story is a good example that helps just at our level understand what Puritan society was all about. So just know who she was. Yeah, I don't think I want to say much else on chapter 2. Anyone have any questions on chapter 2 before I move on for 3? I'm going to open up my other, apparently I'm still presenting to everyone. That's okay. I'm pulling up the learning targets and vocab for chapter 3, guys. We'll go for another 15 minutes or so on chapter 3, and then we'll call it a day. Speak up, please, if you have any questions while I'm doing this awkward transition. Hopefully some of this stuff is familiar. Maybe you didn't remember all the details, but as I'm saying it again in these very, very brief bullets, hopefully some of it's familiar. Okay, chapter 3. Sweet. So this one, guys, we're going to start. Oh, go ahead. Question? Comment?
Sorry, yeah. I had a quick question, Mahoney.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
If we just memorize Metacom's War, like you're saying, some of the other key ones, we don't necessarily have to remember all of the wars during that time. We can just remember one Metacom's War, right?
That is exactly what I'm saying, Aaron. I think that is the smart strategy. Now, if we had all the time in the world and we were history experts and you guys have been doing this for 10 years, yeah, you should probably know all the conflicts. I mean, I probably should know all the conflicts. I teach the class, but I don't. And so, Aaron, I just would encourage you to focus on one and stick with it. And in fact, guys, while I'm still screen sharing with you, I really recommend, I was pushing this all year. I really recommend you get this AP review test book on Amazon. This is where what I use to refresh myself. AP, let's do APUSH review book. And now I'm totally blank. It's this one right here. It has this cover. The publisher is AMSCO. You can see it right in front of me, guys. I really, really recommend you get it. You could have it shipped to you on Amazon in just a couple days and have it in time to study. I'm, of course, going to keep leading you through it, but you should supplement everything I do with this. My version is just one take on it, just one spin on it. So get that one right there, AMSCO. Sweet. Let's look again at chapter 3 for a few more minutes. The vocabulary. All right, here we got our Quakers. Oh, yeah, now I remember these proprietary colonies. William Penn. We remember our middle colonies are much more open to religious diversity. We understand that we have a little bit more ethnic diversity in the middle colonies. This is where we're going to start to see large immigrants from German-speaking regions coming in. Remember, guys, New England and Jamestown, that's a British settlement. It's going to be our middle colonies that accept more of the Western European settlers in the 1600s right there. If I'm looking down at the learning targets, guys, obviously that first one is super important. It's a silly one, but comparing the northern, middle, and southern colonies, you've got to be able to do. Just think about weather. What is the climate like? What can you grow? Can I grow cash crops in New England and Pennsylvania? Not generally. You get one decent growing season. You're going to be growing in cash crops in your fertile, low-lying tidal regions of the Carolinas, Maryland, things like that. So I seriously think it's stupid for some of you to think, but think weather. weather is really important in differentiating because weather is going to dictate what your economic activity is in that time period. Understanding the religious differences. Go ahead, whoever that was.
I was just going to say, what about cereal crops? Wasn't that a thing?
But that's not a cash crop. You need to know they do cereal crops. They're growing. It's not that you can't grow anything up there, Dre. You just can't grow things like rice and tobacco, what you can grow in the Carolinas. You can totally get an awesome crop of wheat, corn, oats, a whole bunch of other cereal crops, but those cash crops are not growing in that type of climate, that type of soil. I don't know a lot about it, but it has something to do with freeze and thaw and stuff like that as well. So differentiating, guys, economically, religiously, who settles there? What are the type of people coming? Are indentured servants flooding into Puritan New England? No way. Those are cohesive family units in Puritan New England. Cool. Navigation Acts. Hopefully you guys remember that. That's about triangular trade. And we'll talk more about triangular trade.
What's the time? What's the year? Like from what year to what year is chapter 3?
Chapter 3 is basically from 1650 to 1750. Chapter 3 really talks about transatlantic colonies up to the 7 Years' War and the end of salutary neglect. Hopefully that helped. Third learning target, guys, don't really worry about it. But actually, I'm going to take that back. Do worry about it. You guys have to know the vocabulary word House of Burgesses, and you have to know the Puritan town meeting. Remember, they want to ask you about early examples of democracy in these British colonies. These are not perfect, guys. Hardly anyone gets a vote unless you're a landowner or a property owner, but these are early forms of democracy. This is not the crown dictating to us how we live in the British colonies. We do have local forms of government, and it's important you understand that the example in New England is the Puritan town meeting, where all male property owners are essentially given a vote in how the town is run. It's still basically a theocracy, but again, you can argue that it is a form of democracy. And also the House of Burgesses. Doesn't mean that poor people vote. Most people don't vote in these societies, guys. Again, in the House of Burgesses, it's going to be the plantation owners, the tobacco growers. But again, it's not Parliament in England, and it's not the king dictating how to run stuff out in the colonies. When the crown is allowing the colonies to govern themselves, even though it's not that democratic, it's at least a little bit democratic. And that's what they want to see on the AP test. You have to know what those early forms of political representation are for those colonies. Virginia House of Burgesses, Puritan town meeting. Any questions on those two? Sweet. I don't think I need to screen share for any much longer. Let's just talk South Atlantic system, which is triangular trade, and we'll call it a day there, folks. All right, let's go back here. Let's stop sharing. All right. Actually, I guess I'll share for one more second because I have such a good map for this. So bear with me for one more second, guys. The triangular trade map is what it's all about. If you have my slides up, you know exactly what I'm going to put up. You've seen this before. Where's a good one from our textbook, though? This one's decent. And remember, guys, triangular trade and the Columbian Exchange are very, very different. Here's the one I like. I shouldn't say very, very different, but they are quite different. No, kind of weird. I can't find the one I like the most. This one's okay, though. Remember, guys, the Columbian Exchange has a lot of accidental exchange. Sure, a lot of it's on purpose as well. The transmission of domesticated animals to the New World, the introduction of the horse in the New World, the bringing back of gold to Europe. That's all planned, but there's a lot of accidental transmission in the Columbian Exchange. Triangular trade is not so much of an accidental transmission, and it has more to do with a planned system of mercantilism. Remember, mercantilism, guys, is where the government heavily controls the economy, and the government essentially crafts all policies to favor them economically in a way. They're going to have high taxes. Remember, these navigation acts, part of Britain's mercantilist economy is not letting the colonists use French ships. It's telling them who they can trade with. The crews have to be a certain percentage British. All of those are crafted to put more money in England's pocket. That's a mercantilist policy. So again, guys, look at the map real quick and understand triangular trade. You need to go what comes from Africa, what comes from the New World, and what's coming from Europe. Remember, I can make a bookcase in the New World, but it's so much easier and high quality to have one shipped over from Great Britain. It's manufactured goods coming from Europe, guys. That is what we are wanting in the colony. That's manufactured goods. We can make it ourselves, sure, but it's way cheaper and way better just to have it shipped over from England. We are sending natural resources back, whether it's lumber, fish, whale oil from New England, cereal grains from the middle colonies, or cash crop from our southern and tobacco growing colonies, guys. Understand what's going where. I don't need to spend more time on this, I think, guys, but what are the impacts? That's what's important. The impacts for Europe, huge amounts of wealth. What are the impacts for Africa? Well, they're also going to receive wealth for their coastal African empires. They're going to receive manufactured goods like gunpowder. They're going to receive rum. They're going to be selling a lot of slaves. Remember, guys, white slave traders don't really penetrate that deep into the African interior. Most of the slaves are brought to the African coast after they're conquered in war. Understand that Africa is getting a lot of manufactured goods for the exchange for their slaves. And then please understand where these slaves go. It's not just North America. It's primarily the sugar islands, folks. Slaves being brought to North America like Virginia, that's going to be later in the 1700s. 1600s, it's primarily the sugar planting islands that receive a bulk of the African slaves. I could keep speaking on this, but I don't really need to. You guys understand the map. You understand the consequences and understand that this has to do with wealth, profit. This has to do with changing demographics. You always need to reference when things are going to cause demographics to shifts. I don't care whether we're talking about a law like the Homestead Act in the 1860s or whether you're talking about triangular trade. You will sound smarter if you can articulate on the test that, hey, this thing we're talking about right here, this is going to cause demographic shift. And we know what demographic shift can potentially lead to in cases. That's just how you sound smarter, guys. I'm not just describing triangular trade and what goes where. I'm also going beyond the map because this map doesn't say anything about demographic shift. It doesn't help me understand that the population of Haiti is going to be like something like 80% African American, Afro-Caribbean at that time. Look beyond the map. That's what you got to do to get those analysis points on the AP test, guys. Triangular trade. And understand that that's a mercantilist policy. Cool. Chapter 3, Middle Passage. You guys know what Middle Passage is. That's the voyage. Slaves go across. Death rates are incredibly high. On my slides, I linked you to a clip from Roots. Remember, it's like a 5-minute clip from that 1970s show Roots, where it's got the slave ship that pulls up, and they're talking about having to burn sulfur in the hull to get rid of the stench, and the captain's worried about what's going back, and the slave dealer says, "Oh, no worries, Captain, your hull will be full of tobacco." And it's kind of a simple scene, but it's just trying to illustrate what triangular trade is. I believe I have a link to that video clip on my lecture slides if you want to go back and peek at them. But just knowing what the Middle Passage is, guys, you're never going to be writing an essay on that. You're never going to be describing it in detail. But if you see that vocabulary term, you have to know it. If you're ever talking about the South Atlantic system, a major impact of the South Atlantic system on people is their experience in the Middle Passage, the cramming of slaves into those ships, the high death rates, and everything associated with that. Even understanding, guys, the breaking up of tribal connections that have gone for generations. This is important. Cool. I don't want to get into the spread of slavery in North America today because that's obviously going to be a topic that spans so many chapters, guys. We'll talk more about slavery in North America on a later date, but please understand the connection between slavery in the Caribbean and the Middle Passage. Understand the connection between those two vocabulary terms and triangular trade, and understand what is going where. And also, folks, remember, South Atlantic system, that is triangular trade. When I say South Atlantic system, they mean the same exact thing. Cool. Let's turn off the screen share. Stop sharing. I don't want to overload you guys. I just wanted to go over those learning targets and go through it kind of rapid. Am I still presenting or am I off?
You're off.
Okay, sweet. So guys, we'll basically call it there. I'm gonna keep the stream open for another couple minutes and take any questions, but I'm just trying to refresh you on all this stuff we've been talking about, guys. Now is not the time to go into all the detail in the world. Now is the time to say, wait a minute, I know what that vocabulary word is, and I can say something smart about it. I don't know that much about it, Mahoney, but I at least know what it is and can put it in context. That's what it's time to start focusing on, folks. We're going to start with learning targets for chapter 3 next time we live stream, and then we'll do 3 and into 4, and we'll keep on going, guys. Remember, you do have an assignment due tomorrow, and it is the period 2 review sheet that I posted on AP Classroom. Has anyone had any problems accessing it or any issues so far? Okay. Grace at one point asked me if she could print out a copy and take a picture and attach it. That's totally fine. Doesn't matter at all to me. You don't have to watch all of the videos that are linked on there, but I highly recommend you do. They're really helpful. I sometimes watch them myself to review for the class and everything. So that's what we got. Did we miss any good chat? What's a watershed event? Grace, I saw your question you posted 15 minutes ago. That's a really good question, Grace. A watershed event. A watershed event is a turning point or a huge marker. That's actually a really good question. Sometimes I use vocabulary and it makes sense to me, but it doesn't make sense to you guys. So I'm really glad you asked that, Grace. What is a watershed event? It's a marker. It's a turning point. It's a milestone. Cool. What else do we got? Any other questions, folks? I'm purposely trying to keep it short. I don't want to overload anyone. So I'm just scanning again. Chapter 3 learning targets. Middle colonies, southern colonies, northern colonies. Getting back in, maybe reading it a little about the Quakers and William Penn in the middle colonies might be helpful for you guys. Oh, here's one thing I didn't talk about. Remember, guys, what happens to places like Boston? Think about what Boston is. Where is it geographically? We know it's in Massachusetts, but where does Boston in relation?
Port cities.
Thank you, Grace. Yes. And if you were thinking port cities, guys, you were right on it. That's a huge part of it. All of the spin-off industries. That was one of my favorite parts of that lecture, is talking about the spin-off industries. If you've got 100 ships a day coming into your harbor, those ships need to be unloaded. Those supplies need to be stored in warehouses. Piers need to be built. Ropes need to be created to refit the ship. Sails need to be repaired and sewn. These sailors need brothels. They need restaurants. They need hotels. All of these spin-off industries, guys, created. That's actually, in fact, one of the more important parts of triangular trade. And it's on the vocabulary list, but I didn't specifically address it now. So I'm really glad I glanced back up on it. And that's called, again, a maritime economy. Understanding a maritime economy, folks. It's what San Francisco was based off of for a long time. It was what New York was based off of for a long time. Ports. Ports breed diversity. Ports breed economic activity. Great. Cool. Anything else, folks? Any other questions for the day?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
About the AP exam. So I know they're changing it up. Is it mostly going to be like free response questions? Because I know that's what they're trying to do for AP Lang, instead of having multiple choice and an essay.
So Zoe, I'm going to get two questions, Zoe. I am going to get two things. I'm going to get that answer for sure on April 3rd. They've told all the AP teachers that on April 3rd, we'll email you guys more information. But Zoe, it's only 45 minutes long. We know that's not enough time to write an LEQ or a DBQ. I literally think they're going to make you write like 3 short answer questions. I can't prove that. I'm not promising that. But as soon as I get the email updating me, I'll let you know. But just based on time, that's what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to get 3 or 4 short answer questions, probably on all different time periods. You'll get a colonial one. You'll probably get, a mid-1800s one, and you'll probably get a couple more modern ones. That's my guess, but I will find out for sure on April 3rd and let you guys know.
Cool.
And then someone typed in, I think Tiana said in the chat, where's the review packet on AP Classroom? Tiana, that packet is on Google Classroom. That packet is on Google Classroom. So one thing I owe you guys still is I told you I would make some remake quizzes on AP Classroom. I have not done that. I'm still working on that. So we have plenty of weeks to go through that. I want a couple of you who kind of bombed those quizzes to retake them. So I still owe you a few chapters of quizzes on AP Classroom that I'm working on. But again, if you retake anything, or if you didn't take them initially or whatever, email me so I know to check, and then I'll get on there. Tiana, did that answer your question? That review packet is on Google Classroom.
I had a quick question. How do you recommend remembering all different time periods and what's in the time periods? How do you recommend knowing that? So memorizing all the different time periods,
Well, one way to do it, Aaron, is all the time periods have specific dates. So, for example, this first one we're working at is period 2, and it's 1607 to 1754. Those dates mean something. They're not random. 1607 is Jamestown. 1754 is the French and Indian War. So I think, Aaron, what would be really helpful is if you just kind of tried to keep track of why they picked those years. And remember, knowing years is never really important. But understanding that they started it with this event and they ended it with this event, I think it'll help you make sense of the stuff that's kind of in between. So
Okay.
that's if I was to say one sentence, that would be my one sentence tip on how to do it. Look at the years of the periods and say, why the heck did they pick that year? If they picked 1848, oh, that's the end of the Mexican-American War. So they're probably, now I'm going to understand that the fight over whether that land will be slave or free. And Bethany has a good comment. Let's see what Bethany's comment says. It says, one of the review videos talks about a difference between New England and Chesapeake colonies being more religious tolerant. Okay, so Aaron, did that address your question, hopefully? As a strategy, one strategy? Okay. Bethany, your question says, one of the review videos talks about New England and being more religious tolerant than the Chesapeake colonies for Christians. So Bethany, that is my understanding. And when I say that, Bethany, even though the Southern colonies are the Church of England, you can be really a not participant and not get shunned from the community. If you live in Jamestown, you're not going to have someone tell on you for not going to church. You're not going to be like outed as a bad member of the community. Puritan New England's very, very different. There's all sorts of expectations about church attendance and things like that, and they're not going to really tolerate anyone who's wishy-washy on their faith. So I do believe that statement is accurate, Bethany. I do believe that there is more religious toleration in all of the colonies besides New England. We tend to think of the middle colonies as being religiously tolerant, but I do believe that you're going to see more religious toleration in the Chesapeake just because their expectations are so much less. That's my opinion, and I think I could find something in the book to back that up, but that's what I believe. Hopefully that answers your question, Bethany. Great. And again, it's all about the need to conform in Puritan New England. Now, I don't know that they're going to let you totally defy the Church of England in South Carolina, for example, but you know, if you're on the fence or you're wishy-washy, you're not coming, they're not going to trip, I think. Hopefully that answered it in my own way. What are the questions? Anyone else got one before we sign off? No? Cool. All right, guys. Let's see. What time? Hey, Chris, what do we want to do tomorrow? Hold on, I'm talking to my brother. What's our schedule for tomorrow? I'm muting myself real quick. But stand by for 10 seconds.
Lachlan, look at my cat.
Did you bring your cat over there? Because mine just kind of crawled on top of me repeatedly.
Fuck you. Shut up.
Like,
I don't
she's
care
just
where
been
my cat
ramming
is here.
herself into me for the past 20 minutes because she loves me so much.
I don't care.
I think you do, though.
Point.
Okay, folks.
I have
Tomorrow's
a cat
Thursday, right?
too.
Thursday.
Okay. Some of you will like this, some of you won't.
Tomorrow's Thursday?
Yeah.
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 Grace,
What?
I'm sorry, Grace. I'm going to pick a slightly different time. Tomorrow, guys, the live stream will be at 12:30, which is the exact start of 7th period.
Okay.
I know that won't work for some of you. I apologize, but I'm just going to kind of change the time. Some of the days they'll work for you, some of them they won't. But then remember, they go on YouTube as soon as we're done. As soon as we sign off here, this is up on YouTube. So, within 20 minutes, it's up on YouTube. So tomorrow, guys, 12:30, I'll post the link. Hopefully you can make it, Grace. I'm sorry. Yeah, you can show up late to that, Grace. No problem. 12:45. Okay, cool. Anyone else have any questions or burning concerns?
No.
Guys, APUSH should not be a point of stress. Your grade is not like you, especially those of you logged on. I'm looking at the list of the 16 people logged on here. I have zero concerns about any single person on this list, guys. So this should not be a point of stress. Just focus on reviewing for the AP test the best you can. Shoot me any questions that you might have. All right. If there's nothing else, I'm going to wave goodbye.
All right. Goodbye.
All right, folks, I'll see you tomorrow at 12:30 if you can make it. Love you guys. Bye. Oh, nice cat. I like when you guys hold your cats up and I can see all the pets.
See you, Mahoney.
See you, Logan.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. All right, stop recording. Bye.
Bye.